Well, we begin tonight with the 3-year anniversary of the greatest assault on American democracy in modern times, the January 6th insurrection. We're just about 3 days away, again, from that anniversary. And the key architects of that extensive plan, including members of Congress, remain at large. For those of you who may have forgotten, roughly a dozen members of Congress met with Donald Trump at the White House after his loss and worked with his allies to implement a plan to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The plan, cooked up by Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, was dubbed the Green Bay Sweep. Part of the plan was pressuring Attorney General Bill Barr to investigate false claims of voter fraud. Barr called those claims BS and idiotic, and resigned 2 weeks after publicly stating that there were no credible claims of fraud. That's where Republican Congressman Scott Perry jumps into the fray. It was Perry who took it upon himself to find someone within the administration who was willing to do what Barr refused to, namely to lie for the president. And Perry had just the man, Jeffrey Clark, a former assistant U.S. Attorney General in the Environmental Division, who was more than willing to disregard his constitutional oath. Clark first came to Trump's attention after Congressman Perry recommended him to Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. And now, like Meadows, Clark is indicted in Georgia for his role in the election scheme. He's also one of the 6 unnamed co-conspirators in Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump. Cassidy Hutchinson has mentioned Perry and his role. She did so in her eyewitness testimony to what happened behind the scenes at the White House in the lead up to January 6th. And here's what she told a local Pennsylvania affiliate about their congressman.
But I think it is also important for central Pennsylvanians to know that Scott Perry was central to the planning of January 6th and central to the planning of operating the Justice Department officials to execute a plan that Donald Trump wanted. And what Donald Trump wanted was to essentially shred the Constitution in any way that he could to stay in power. And Scott Perry has a lot of information about that.
In her congressional testimony, Hutchinson alleged that Congressman Perry was one of several lawmakers who sought a pardon from Trump before he left office. We also learned from publicly released text messages seized from Perry's phone in connection to Jack Smith's investigation that Perry not only introduced Trump to Clark, but he also held meetings with people like Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, and others. After failing to get Clark installed at the DOJ, Perry began implementing a second part of the plan, which centered on members of Congress delaying the vote on January 6th by objecting to the certification. Part of that was helping facilitate the delivery of a false slate of electors to Vice President Mike Pence. And here's what's ironic. Perry was reelected the same day Donald Trump lost. Oddly enough, he never claimed his election was rigged, only Trump's, meaning he expected people to believe that only the top line on the ballot was rigged, but no other race listed below it on the same form. And Perry's 100% faith in his election continues. He is running again to represent Pennsylvania's 10th congressional district. But that's becoming a bit more complicated. Yesterday, a former Democratic congressional candidate in the district filed a lawsuit calling for Perry to be removed from the 2024 ballot due to the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause, citing his active role in trying to undermine the 2020 results. Frankly, it's pretty stunning that it has taken this long, given the long trail of publicly available evidence of Perry's role in actively undermining the election. But he's hardly alone. In this day and age, in the Republican Party, accountability and the Constitution come second to Trump, which explains why every single member of the House Republican leadership has endorsed the coup president, a man who was ordered by the Colorado Supreme Court and Maine's top election official to be removed from the ballot because of his role in overturning the election and inciting the January 6th insurrection. Late today, the former president asked the Supreme Court to reverse Colorado's decision, using some stunning legal arguments about what constitutes insurrection and the role of the presidency. Which brings us to Joe Biden, the current president, who is just as unpopular as a man who incited an insurrection. Biden and Vice President Harris will launch their re-election campaign in earnest later this week. Biden will hold his first real campaign event on January 6th near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, where George Washington and the Continental Army spent a bleak winter nearly 250 years ago. There, he will lay out how modern-day America could face its own bleak winter, according to his campaign manager. The message is clear, and it is simple. We are running a campaign like the fate of our democracy depends on it, because it does. Joining me now is Benjamin Wittes, editor-in-chief of Lawfare and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster and strategist, and MSNBC political analyst. Thank you both for being here. Ben, thanks you for being here in person. I'm going to start with you because Donald Trump, his attempts to stay in power depend on a reading of the 14th Amendment that excludes only one officer from the oath that he took and accountability to it, and that would be the President of the United States. Does that make sense to you?
So it certainly doesn't make logical sense. There is a non-trivial legal argument that it's what the Constitution says. I think it's not the better legal argument on that point, but there is an argument to be made. As a logical matter, it makes no sense at all.
Right.
The drafters of the 14th Amendment were concerned to keep Confederate actors, soldiers, and politicians out of power in the new regime. And it would have been very odd for them to exclude Jefferson Davis from that, or to say that, Robert E. Lee or some Confederate private could run for president of the United States. That would be a very odd thing for them to do.
Yeah.
Ironically, because of this quirk about the presidency in relation to this office, Scott Perry actually, it's more clear that somebody, like if Scott Perry depending on how broadly you construe the insurrection, it's more clear that this covers Scott Perry than it is that it covers Donald Trump.
Oh, it's very clear. And it's ironic that he would think that elections are meaningful when he wants to run, and therefore he wants to run again. Let me just stay with you for just one moment. This is in the Trump appeal to the Supreme Court. Here is what he is saying. First, the president is not an officer of the United States. He took a different oath than the one set forth in Section 3, and the presidency is not an office under the United States. Therefore, President Trump falls outside the scope of Section 3. Second, the Colorado Supreme Court erred in how it described President Trump's role in the events of January 6, 2021. It was not insurrection, and Trump in no way engaged in insurrection. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first part of that is this technical argument that it kind of doesn't apply to the president. And it's a tortured, complicated legal argument that has some support in certain academic circles. It's not a trivial argument. The Supreme Court will take it seriously. Now, the second part of it, which is that Trump didn't engage in insurrection, actually has two parts, right? One is January 6th an insurrection within the meaning of the insurrection clause? And the second is, did Trump engage in it, right? He didn't storm the Capitol himself. He's not. I think the argument that Donald Trump, ironically, the sillier of the arguments is actually the better one.
Yeah.
So the argument that there's a technical mismatch between the officer language, the office language, and the nature of the presidency is, for obscure legal reasons, actually a better argument than the argument that just is quite ridiculous, actually, that January 6th is not an insurrection or that President Trump didn't meaningfully engage in it.
Right.
And so I think look for that weird, tortured argument to the extent the Supreme Court wants to evade this problem and get rid of the Colorado Supreme Court. Look for that weird, tortured argument about officer actually to have more legs. It's less embarrassing because it's technical.
And there's also the fun part about Section 3 saying or supported insurrection. And there have been a bunch of people convicted from the Insurrection Act, and they have all cited Donald Trump as the person they were doing it for. So that makes it a little more difficult for him as well.